last week because you were traveling, and we actually got several inquiries. Where's Andy? Where's Andy? And then, in fact, yesterday during our 9 p.m. Premiere of one of our videos last night, they said, is Andy going to be there tomorrow? Is Andy going to be there? So I said, yes, Andy's going to be there for the weekly market update. So here we are.
I appreciate that. You had to bring my daughter to college in University of Wisconsin, so it was great. And I've never seen her so happy ever in her entire life. So it wasn't so sad as everyone always says. It was actually kind of a happy deal. So it was a good week, and it's good to be back, though. A little bit rested, which is nice, too.
That's always helpful for sure. We've got a story that came out this morning that I put out on our Twitter feed. It's right in line with everything you've been talking about since I saw your main stage presentation at the Rule Symposium on Natural Resources Investing last month in Boca Raton, Florida, where you talked about the world absolutely pivoting away, drumbeat after drumbeat after drumbeat, away from being subject to the U.S. dollar hegemony and being under the thumb of the capricious and spendthrift Western world, including the U.S. and Europe, and instead going off on their own and deciding that they're going to do things that serve their best interest. Remarkable, huh? Imagine that. So here's one that came out from Bloomberg. We'll put a link to it in the description of this video. Bloomberg, under their markets section, Gazprom, which is a Russian company, Gazprom to shift gas sales to China into rubles and yuan from the euro. Gas giant also plans to move 25% of their sales to Turkey to rubles, and Kremlin seeking to move trade out of, quote, unfriendly currencies. So that, we'll put a link to that Bloomberg article so people can avail themselves of that. But I thought we have to kick off with that because it's just exactly what you've been telling us to keep watching for, because it just keeps happening. So can you weigh in on that and let us know why you think this is meaningful, in what context?
Well, it's meaningful in a very large context. I mean, first of all, I think what they're saying is that the EU needs to roll back its sanctions in exchange for Russia resuming gas deliveries to that continent, first and foremost, as they've kind of, shut down the pipeline, so to speak. And now they're talking about accepting it in other currencies as well. And I think it just confirms that Russia doesn't need to pretend any longer that it needs to export commodities through Europe. There's more than enough demand in India and in China. And I think, it makes sense. I think, if you realize that when you talk about the Russian reserves in dollars and euros and pounds and yen, they were frozen. So it's unlikely, I think, going forward, I think you'll see more of this, that any of these countries will want to continue accumulating reserves in these currencies. And I think that, it will be more along their national currencies like you're seeing here, or in gold. I think it's very telling. And I did a little research over the weekend, and I realized that the numbers are getting even crazier than I'd ever thought. First of all, you have 6 of the 13 OPEC countries right now are in or are in the process of joining the BRICS nations. The 7th, the United Arab Emirates, has signed up with a new development bank, and that new development bank is operated by the BRICS. And if you look at even something a little bit more telling, I've made a big deal over the last year or two with you and others about the Belt Road Initiative, right? So we've talked about how this is the coalition of Asia and Africa, but a lot of countries that aren't in Asia or Africa are also signing on to it. And one of the things that I found to be incredibly interesting is that every single one of the 13 OPEC countries are in the Belt Road Initiative, every single one. And so when you talk about a shift away from the dollar and away from the petro reserve status, it's happening right in front of us. Not only that, you have Russia considering a plan to buy as much as 70 billion in yuan and other friendly currencies, as they call it, in order to slow the rise of the ruble. But, that was money that always went into dollars and into euros. So you are seeing a de-dollarization happen in real time. And, it's one thing to talk about this in summer. Let's have this discussion again in November and December and see what it looks like when the gas is shut off to Germany and to parts of the European Union, how different the tone will be. I think this is just more of the same done again, and really crystallizes my belief that this is this linear progression I keep talking about, where little by little by little by little. There's a term if I remember right, way back from high school, in literature called the fallacy of composition, which basically says these individual pieces in and of themselves don't carry the same weight as all of them put together. And you put them all together and you see a puzzle piece or pieces of a puzzle that are beginning to take shape and form something that I think if you just look at the individual pieces, they're not as impressive. Put it all together and you can see 80-90% of the world's population is forming an alliance. And whether it is stated obviously or you have to kind of put the pieces together to see it, I think it's becoming very, very obvious. And I think you should expect to see more of this as we continue down this road here in 2022.
It's not obvious to some folks who are trying to just get through their month with their budget, trying to keep their job, trying to keep bread on the table and gas in the car and that sort of thing, hopefully trying to protect a little bit of their savings, put something in savings in such a way that it's going to stay as savings into the future. It's not obvious to ordinary people necessarily what these geopolitical hijinks and machinations and twists and turns have to do with them. And you've done a good job in the past of kind of bringing it home. Could you maybe give one or two examples of why it matters, why people should care what currency Russia's selling its natural gas in and who they're selling it to? How is that going to affect an ordinary person in the U.S., for example?
Because all of that in years past would have settled in dollars as the world reserve currency. And the lack of demand for the dollar, just go back to the x-axis you learned in Econ 101, less demand means greater supply, or another way of saying that, less demand means a lowered price for the dollar. So as the world moves away from the dollar, you have less and less and less and less demand. Well, another way of saying that is, where are those dollars going? I think those dollars become hot potatoes. Those dollars are going to be sold for other things or other assets. And as those dollars come home, if we think inflation is bad now, what happens when a good portion of the world starts to sell dollars in favor of their local currencies or in favor of gold? You look at, for example, this month or last month, India imported 46.5 tons or 1.49 million ounces of gold. And they imported over 1,136.5 tons or 36.54 million ounces of silver. And that was in June. The July numbers are looking to be about 1,700 tons or 54.7 million ounces, again, of silver. And that's kind of unofficial. Those haven't come out yet, but that's the whisper as they're talking about. Ed Steer was talking about. And when we talk about Turkey, again, this is a country that is now joining the BRICS nations, right? They imported 22.4 tons of gold or 720,200 ounces and 92.3 tons of silver during last month. The countries that are de-dollarizing, the countries that are expressing interest in joining the BRICS nations or are members of the BRICS nations are massively accumulating assets or paying for them in currencies other than the dollar. And that lack of demand for the dollar will have massive negative implications for the value of the dollar back here at home. So while we really don't care what Russia is buying energy for or what Turkey is buying energy for or in and of itself, but you should, because all of those things used to settle in dollars, and now the lack of dollar demand means less demand for the dollar, means a falling dollar value, means higher interest rates and more inflation. And that's the bottom line. And the Fed, to me, is a sideshow. The Fed really is a sideshow. Look, they may get tough on inflation. The market still doesn't believe it yet, because the one-year Treasury right now is over 3.5%. That's greater than the 2, the 5, and the 10-year. That's as inverted as it gets. I don't know if I've ever seen it so inverted. The 1-year Treasury is just a few ticks away. It's like 3.2 or 3.3 versus 3.5 or 6 on the 30-year Treasury bond. Who would want to get virtually the exact same return for a 30-year bond versus a 1-year? That's a massive inversion. So the market still believes the Fed is going to pivot.